Hello,
Good.
everybody.
Hello. Greetings and good evening. Every time I watch that intro, I'll be like, man, we didn't have some good people on this thing.
I know. Looking back, I'm like, we have had the best, the absolute best.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
we have. And we continue to bring the best. Tonight is
Yes, we
nothing less
do.
than that.
Yes, we do. Let
Thank
me
We
let,
you.
have
let me
none
put let me
other.
put her in the middle. Okay, there we
Yes,
go.
put her in the middle. We
Yes.
have
Hold
none
on just a
other
second.
than Dr. Shively Smith tonight. Hold on. I
Hello.
want you to see her beautiful
There
face.
we go. There we go.
There it is.
Hello.
New
Hi.
Testament scholar, a brilliant, just kind person.
Ah,
And we're about to have a good conversation tonight, y'all. I already know.
well,
So the people are
thank you.
coming in. I'm gonna give them a couple minutes to
Come
get
on
into
in,
the
y'all. Come
virtual
on.
rooms.
And as
I
you
see
come
Olivia.
in,
I see you,
yeah.
Reverend Marissa, down in Atlanta. Let me check YouTube and see if the people checking in yet.
They're checking in.
They checking in because I
Okay.
see the numbers going
Thank
in. So let us know y'all watching because we about to go in with Dr. Shively. Say, want to say hey to the people, Dr. Shively?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the gathering, for having me in this space with you all to have these conversations. I hope I can say this on screen, but I told the sisters, I said my cotton has went up over here. My phone people have been saying, we see you're going to be on the gathering, so thank you for raising my quality.
Oh my goodness. You elevated us. You elevated
Thank
us.
you for
Thank
Right.
elevating
you.
You
me
know, we got
Yeah.
Shively, honey.
I see
in the
Lori
lineup of the
Person.
sisters.
I see
Which is
Lori from New Jersey. I see
Yeah.
Shayla and Lisa Diane White from
In
Atlanta.
Atlanta. I
Yeah,
see Teresa
Teresa.
down in Atlanta. I mean in Memphis. So yeah, they are coming in
yeah,
the room.
they're
We're getting
coming in
ready
the
to jump
room.
on in.
All right.
Well, Dr. Ivy, you want to start us off tonight?
Sure.
I do. So let's go ahead and begin because we're gonna have some really good conversation. And let's begin with our first question for Dr. Shively. Who are you? And when
Ah,
we ask who are you, we're not talking about what you do, but we want to
that's
know
right.
who are you?
That's right. Man, that's a loaded question. It's an excellent question. And I appreciate the question just because we're so accustomed to answering these questions based upon our scholarship and what we do and what we're researching. These days when I ask myself or think about who am I, my first response is I am mother. I am mommy to two chocolate girls who
Mm,
keep me anchored. I mean, I know you said we're not talking about what we do, but I know myself
mm-hmm.
through my chocolate daughters these days. So my 17-year-old and my 9-year-old, there's a way in which I know who I am because of them. So I have these moments when listen to them, or they do things, and I'll say, "Oh yeah, that's me."
Mm.
Right? I'm like, well, some days I go, "Oh yeah, that's me." I saw that's me all day. Hallelujah. And then other times I go, "Oh, that's be better than your mama. Do better." And then other times I look at them, and it is them. It's their authentic voices, their authentic being, it is their questions, their passions,
Mm.
their gifts and graces and concerns that it widens and expands me. So these days, I know myself through my daughters. And so if I had to talk about my daughters, I would say that they are people who have deep love and
Mm.
kindness and
Wow.
tenderness in them, that they are people who see people, right? Don't judge
Wow.
people, but see people and
Wow.
try to build bridges and relationships with them. And I like to say that probably is a part of my way of being. I love the relational life, what it means to be connected to people, not through judgment, not through rules, but through just the
Mm.
basic common ground of humanity. And I see
Yeah.
that in them, and I'm thankful.
Wow, that's beautiful. We were talking when we had the test run yesterday, where we got hyped just on the test
We
run, but
did.
but
Right.
we realized that all three of us have daughters.
Yes.
Yeah, and
Yes, it's
so
amazing.
so what does it mean raising daughters? And then we'll get to the other who are you professionally,
Yeah.
but I wanted to touch on that just a little bit. What is it for you to have daughters now in this season in the life of this world?
Yeah, I mean, especially chocolate daughters. I mean, so I always like
Mhm.
to talk about, I'm a mother, I'm a mocha mama. So,
Mm-hmm.
these little chocolate girls walking around, especially now where we are with the Roe versus Wade and all of that. It does. We were talking about this yesterday, how it really does raise questions for us and put us, I think, in the position to start having to talk about what does it mean that we are trying to raise these daughters, at least with the message, with the belief that they have their own voices, they have their
Mm-hmm.
own agency, they have rights to determine what they do with their head, heart, and hands, right? That
Hmm.
they can chart their path, right? That they are not anyone's property, they are not owned by anyone, they're not controlled by anyone, that they are free. And
Yeah.
freedom of the Black woman's body has been a hard earned,
Yes.
hard
Yes.
fought, I would say hard
Mm-hmm.
fought um,
Mm-hmm.
engagement since the very beginning of this country. And now to sit here and say and have to look at them and say, so that is still true. And now we have to think about what that means in terms of when you're managing and having to deal with a larger society that is now trying to take some of those freedoms and that
Yes.
control and that agency away about your bodies. I think it hits me very
Yes.
closely
Yes.
because, like I said, Black women, Black daughters, Black girls, the one thing that has always we've had to constantly fight for is our right to be and to be untouched, unbothered,
Mm.
unless we choose to be touched or
Okay.
bothered, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to
Mm-hmm.
chart that path. And so I'm talking to my daughters these days about those tensions. What it means to be in your body, to have this history and be at this point in time and still say, I am yet in control of my
Yes.
body. I yet
Yes.
have a right to say yes or no.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't. I'm just thinking about those type. I'm sorry. I'm just going on with that conversation with your
Right.
daughter.
Mm-hmm.
How are they responding? Because
Yeah.
this is a conversation that a lot of people are having to figure out how to navigate. Like,
Yeah.
and one thing we all say, because we got daughters, and like you just said, oh, that's me, that ain't me. That's me is the questions. Have you
Right.
had questions from your kids, or how has that been navigating the
Yeah.
conversation?
Yeah. My oldest is the one who we sit and talk about these things and think about these things. For hers, a lot of anger
Mm. Wow.
about what this means. I mean, like they get to make these
Yeah.
decisions for us, and
Yeah.
I don't see those decisions being made for the men. Like, why aren't they saying the men have to get taken care of? So
Mm-hmm.
there's this real um, anger and questioning of it. The thing that I've picked up on though is, and I saw this with her. I've seen this with sort of some of my nieces, play nieces, god nieces, and so forth and so forth and so on. Has been they're so angry and agitated about it. They're already talking about how they're going to change it, right? So what do we
Mm.
have to do to change this, right? what
Okay.
what are and so she's starting already to count what do elections and what does
Mm-hmm.
that mean and
Mm-hmm.
who. And so to think forward, to think ahead and start planning ahead, not just strategizing, thinking about strategy, that excites me,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
I'm like, if that isn't a Black womanist impulse, I
Okay.
don't know what it is to
Okay.
say, okay, we here now, but we don't have to always be here.
That's
Right.
right.
This
That's right.
we don't have to stay here. And to
That's right.
begin to project forward what
Mm-hmm.
is possible, I think is one thing I keep encouraging her. So what do we do now? What can we do? The other thing that's been really helpful is to remind them of our history, right? To say,
Mm.
so when we talk about women such as Ida B. Wells, Anna Julia Cooper, Shirley Chisholm, Mary McLeod Bethune, I mean, just some of my sheroes. I mean, oh, they know what it's like to have a
Yeah.
society at multiple levels, society, church, telling them what they can and cannot do with their bodies, with their voices, with their gifts, with their minds, and to
Mm.
do it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Mm-hmm.
how does this also mobilize an audacity in us? Retrieve an audacity that's a
Yeah.
part of
Retrieve.
our
Yeah.
heritage and our
Mm-hmm.
story and bring it forward. I think
Mm-hmm.
we were talking about Sankofa, right? This
Right.
fetching, and then we need to bring forward some of that audacity. We're going to do it anyway because we
That's right.
actually have models in the archives of our own history of doing that. So this doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily have to be a new place for Black womanhood and young cis women, period, but particularly women of color. We
Mm.
have some models that we can retrieve that teach us what it means to take authority and voice for ourselves anyway, in
Yeah.
spite of.
So since you done went to the
Wonderful.
black women, I'm sorry, we're gonna have to go on pivot to that because you know that's your thing. Like
That's my thing.
I'll say you write with the black women. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
Doctor,
Mm-hmm.
she has essays in the womanist interpretation, expanding the discourse. She has a new essay in the let me put the books up, y'all know I like to put the books up.
Mm-hmm.
Stony
The
Road and
30th
Child. She's
anniversary.
in the 30th year anniversary. She has essay in that as well. But in
Yeah.
both of those, and you do this in other places, you
Right.
read the biblical passages with writings of black women.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Um.
and you know, you're talking about that, but can you say more about why you do that and how can
Mhm.
this really help this type of womanist interpretation? How can it help, like in this moment, but the church and the churches, but also you know the world right now, like
Yeah.
especially now.
Yeah. I mean, so there's a few. I mean, so the one essay, one more time with the Sodom on my mind, and then witnessing Jesus hang, or sort of rereading of Mary Magdalene through Ida B. Wells' Lynch Chronicles. I mean, so
Mm.
here I think
Wow.
the titles kind of tell you what I'm up to in some ways if you think about it. So here's the piece. I am suspicious of sort of interpretive histories that have excluded us as if we were not interpreting the biblical text the entire time, whether we're reading it or
Mm.
not, right? So I I part of it is to say, so my starting scholars, my starting conversation partners, as I interpret these texts, are uh, my own mothers,
Mm-hmm.
right? My
Mm-hmm.
aunties who didn't even know that they were fighting for me in some way. So it is retrieval. It is also a bringing forward, but it is also a relearning. So part of it is this is a critique to say. So I write those essays in my books. My next book that comes out in the spring 2023 is on the rhetoric of Second Peter and African American women. Is its
Mm.
current title, and part of that is to say I'm teaching myself again how to interpret, right? So the way in which we've been formed as scholars, the ways in which we were formed to interpret and engage the Bible and sort of mainstream theological education, no
Yeah.
matter where
Yeah.
the school was located. I'm like, I know how to do that, but I don't want to do that. I want to do it the way Anna Julia Cooper was doing. I want to do it the way Julia Foote was doing it. I want to do it the way Zilpha Elah was doing it, or Jarena Lee. I want to read the crucifixion, thinking about what Ida B. Wells was up to
Mm-hmm.
when she was chronicling and tracing lynching, and what she saw, what she noted, right? And how does that texture what I need to be talking about when it comes to the crucifixion moment. And so some of it is my own critique of myself, quite frankly, to say, I don't want to read it that way anymore. I want to
Yeah.
read it
Yeah.
and learn how to read it
Yeah.
through let these black women be my teachers. Does
Oh,
that sort of
wow.
help you? Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And so, so yesterday I attended a worship service. Dr. Gina Stewart was here preaching,
Ah,
and she said something in her sermon about the biblical text. She said, in many ways, we have understood it wrong.
Mm.
yes, yes.
And as you were talking, um, I I hear that there are ways to interpret that are different from the ways we have been theologized to interpret scripture, right?
Right.
And so
Hmm.
how important is that for black women, right?
Yeah.
Of all kinds of black women, right? Whether you're conservative or liberal or whatever, to to begin thinking about reading the scriptures, reading the biblical text in ways that aren't traditional.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that word traditional is very important because tradition, when we talk about a traditional way of reading the Bible, you're fundamentally talking about one way, maybe even a couple of ways, among others that got to be at the center and set the norm, right? So
Mm-hmm.
tradition isn't the absence of alternatives. The tradition is the presence of power that gets to decide that they are the norm, right?
That's good,
So,
sir.
Wow.
so
That's
Wow.
good.
so when we talk about the
Mm.
traditional ways in which we have been conditioned and formed to read the Bible, you're talking about that particular line of thinking of what I would talk about as meaning making
Mm-hmm.
that has dominated and been able to what silence, erase,
Yes.
push to
Yes.
the side all others. But there are others, right?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So part of it is the work is some so part of it is so I'm going to say something very, very
Come on
hard.
with it.
Part of it
We
is
told you.
interpretive laziness, right?
Yes.
So
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm.
it's easy to inherit interpretive tradition, right? Because it's the norm. It is what
To
you're able to
inherit.
easily receive, right? These
Mm.
other alternatives you have to go and look for and work with because the tradition has silenced them and removed them. That
Yes.
requires a little bit
Exactly.
Yes.
more work. It also
Yes.
requires a little bit more thought and integrity because most of the times those alternative tracks, those are alternative ways, alternative forms of reading the biblical text are forms that the tradition had never accounted for. They didn't think
Right.
about it, they didn't, because
That's
they
right.
weren't seeing it anyway.
That's
And
right.
so I think that one of the things we have to do is recognize that there are other ways of reading the biblical text that we actually don't have to create. They already exist. We just have to
Mm-hmm.
go get them.
Mm-hmm.
And so my work with particularly 19th century Black women and actually Howard Thurman as well is
Mm-hmm.
around the notion that I'm not necessarily reinventing the wheel other than I'm saying so Anna Julia Cooper can teach me how to read the Gospel of John better
Mm-hmm.
than all these other ways, and I'm going to pay attention to how she's reading it, to what end is she reading it, why is she reading it. This is the other piece. Black women, particularly when you think about 19th century and early 20th century, they weren't reading the biblical text simply for this sort of localized individual spirituality.
That's right.
They they
Wow.
read these biblical texts, which I would talk about it as body with body.
Mm.
And what I mean by that,
Mm.
I mean that they read it through and guided by their bodies. They read it through and
Mm.
guided by the bodies of their communities, which were not
Wow.
always so-called righteous, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when you deal with the 19th century, someone like Jarena Lee or
Mm-hmm.
Zilpha Elah, they're like Julia Foote. They're like, so let's be clear.
Mm.
God called women to preach too. So right, so
Okay.
they're taking their own communities, their own religious communities and powers, brothers, right,
Mm-hmm.
to task and other women to task, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when they're reading with their bodies, they're also critiquing those bodies too, right? They're
Mm.
critiquing those communities. So what they front loaded as valuable, what they front loaded as sort of the ethical guardrails for what matters in the biblical text was the fact that they had their eyes wide open and their feet planted squarely in their
Yeah.
communities and their social bodily lived realities,
Yeah.
right? And they did not use the Bible to
Mm.
pretend that there wasn't there. They used the
Mm.
Bible to articulate what was there
Mm.
and what was yet
Wow.
possible. I think that's a different
Wow.
impulse than the
Yeah.
way some of us have been conditioned towards interpreting the biblical text in the past few decades, right? That's
Yeah.
very, very important.
And the way they interpreted scripture cost them. It wasn't
Right.
like,
Oh, absolutely.
they just, oh, this is how I understand it, and then you just go home, right?
Right,
It
right.
it cost them something. They paid a price for that.
Yeah, I love that. I love the fact that so when we start talking about the prices that they paid, some of them ended up being out having to leave their denomination. Some of them
Right.
Yes.
had to sort of seek the itinerancy. You take someone like Anna Julia Cooper, she
Mm-hmm.
lost her job and had to
Yeah.
go across the country and then come back. And so there were losses of place, of status,
Yes.
of voice. There were losses of resources. There were losses of kinship and community
Yes. Yes.
that they suffered. But they also found something, I
Come
think.
on.
So when you
Come
read
on.
them, when you track them, you end up realizing. So I don't know about you, but Ida B. Wells found her voice, right? She
Mm-hmm.
found
Mm-hmm.
her platform, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, Someone like Anna Julia Cooper lost her job, came back, but here we find Anna Julia Cooper getting a PhD, the fourth Black woman
Mm-hmm.
to get a
Wow.
PhD, and she said, "You're not gonna give me a PhD here in the United States." She goes to the Sorbonne and goes get
Mm.
she goes and gets her PhD there in
Wow.
sociology, talking about the racism and the problems in that country. In France,
Mm-hmm.
right? So and in her 60s, right? So
Wow.
that there is losses for them, absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
but there is also, I think, a real texture of authenticity that
Mm-hmm.
you also see
Yeah.
these women coming into. And then how about this, using it, they use that, they resource that as they are reading the biblical text in ways that affirm what they read there, and also in ways that
Mm-hmm.
critique it, right?
Yeah.
And so I love that dynamism of their stories, right? That dynamism that informs who they are as interpreters.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Okay.
Woo.
All right.
You
So
all are going silent on me.
Cause,
Am I
girl,
doing
you
okay?
talking everybody in the chat like you're talking good, Lord Jesus, you are Lord,
yes.
because we just
Like,
don't let
okay.
it be heard,
Yes.
okay?
So when we were on our tech test, you
Mm-hmm.
said something. You said that you like to play in relationship to your scholarship, right? As a New Testament
Uh-huh.
scholar, you said you like to play in the back of the house.
Mm-hmm.
What does
Yes.
that mean? Tell the people what that means for you.
Yes. So when I am doing standing flat footed in my work, when I say I play in the back of the house, I tend to play Hebrews on back to Revelation chapter 2 letters. So I love the letters, but I love to play in those writings of the New Testament that are that we look over, that we read over, we look past. We may not even know they exist, right? So
Mm-hmm.
First
Mm-hmm.
Peter, Second Peter, Jude, Hebrews, the Johannine letters, first, second, third John.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, I love playing James. I love playing in those writings, partly because of the fact that I think we do ourselves a disservice by not paying attention to
Mm-hmm.
uh, their presence in the canon and what they say. And here's the
Mm-hmm.
piece: how they say it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, because I think we leave ourselves open to a lot of other religious talk, God talk, whatever, that's able to kind of parade itself as being
Mm-hmm.
Christian or God talk or godly. When really that's not the case, and we don't understand. We think it's new. We think some of these conversations, some of these Christian positions, right, and behaviors and attitudes are new, and you're like, actually, you haven't looked at Second Peter, have you? Because that's
Come
not
on.
new, right? And so part of my interest in the back of the house of the New Testament of the Bible is really looking at writings that we have not paid as much attention to that I think we should. That is actually creating particular kinds of cultures. It creates
Mm-hmm.
particular kinds of people and ways of being in relationship to each other that we may not want to accept, right? But
Mm.
you don't even know that you need to have a rebuttal to it because you haven't paid attention to these writings.
Mm. So
Yeah.
Let's dig with it. Go ahead, Ari.
yeah.
Let's dig with
So
it. Let's
yeah,
go.
yeah, yeah. So tell the people ins out here,
Uh-huh.
something about either First or Second Peter
Mm-hmm.
that might surprise us.
Ah, well,
Because I
let's
know I
start
know
with the
there's a
first.
lot. Yeah. Okay. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
let's start with the first. So I think the first thing to think about, particularly with First Peter, which I sort of get to in the first book, is the notion that if you don't start First Peter already situated, already thinking from and with uh, a particular location in the social world, you've already misread the letter.
Mm.
So the key to handling and engaging First Peter is to get the location right.
Now,
Right.
when you
So
say
first,
location, tell
Tell the
people,
people
because
what you mean.
what
there
that
might
means,
be
right?
some
I'm getting ready
people
to do
who are
that.
not exegetes, right? So
Right.
what does
So
that
the
mean?
location of Second Peter. So when you think about the location of Second Peter, the location of Second Peter, the place from which it comes in its world, and the place to which it is written. So where it
Mm-hmm.
comes, and where is it coming from, and where is it going? Is it
Mm.
coming from the emperor's palace? Is it coming from governors who have power and authority and resources? Where is it coming from? It's coming from the margins. So it's coming from a
Mm.
community, particularly at this time, that is one that is heavily under surveillance. They're deeply suspicious. The larger society is very suspicious of this community, right?
Okay.
And so the
Mm-hmm.
letter comes from a community that's under surveillance, right? And is under the pressure of surveillance, and it's written to other people who are under surveillance and under
Mm.
the pressure of surveillance. And so First Peter writes from a place of policing, surveillance,
Wow.
censure, danger to
Wow.
people who are managing surveillance,
Mm-hmm.
censure, policing, danger, and it makes a fundamental social call. So it is it is a socially aware religious writing.
Mm.
Socially aware religious writing, and it is making a social call. So it tells
Wow.
these people, we want to leave, I want you to live and not die. And so you need to do things that
Mm.
what diminish the ways in which you are what suspicious to others. So it actually plays a
Wow.
game of uh politics of respectability. So
That's what I
people,
was
so it,
thinking just now.
yeah,
Yep.
Yeah.
so
Respectability
so
politics.
yeah,
Wow.
so First Peter is a text that is written with an intention of what? Manipulating, managing, leveraging a politics of
Mm.
respectability in the ancient world. And so what it ends up saying is, some of those places that we hate, the household codes are there, right? So it
Mm-hmm.
turns and talks to those who are enslaved, submit to your enslavers, be they good or bad. Then it turns to women and says, submit to your husbands. And then it turns to husbands and says, honor your wives. It says nothing to masters. It says nothing to
Right.
governors or the
Wow.
emperor. And people go, well, why is that? Because they're not in the group.
So it's
So
about those people's survival. It's about their
it is a
survival.
it is a survival strategy. First Peter is a
Mm.
survival strategy to a community that is under surveillance, that is under
Wow.
censure, that is being
Good.
is locally watched and in danger, and it
Mm.
makes a social call. Some of us may not like that call, but the
Mm-hmm.
call is do whatever you need to do to not be suspicious. So
Mm.
don't women, it turns to the women, it says to the women in the group, it says don't sit there and try to evangelize your husbands. Just
Mm-hmm.
do good, do ethics, but don't sit there and start trying to tell them what to do, because these are women who are in households where the male is not a part of that community, is not a part of the believing community, right? And the women
Got it.
have become that, and they are fundamentally in danger. So
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm.
disrupt that, to aggravate that, is for them to risk the danger of being exposed. So here's
Eh,
the piece. Here's a second piece I'll just say to that,
yeah.
which is for all you preachers and pastors that do pastoral counseling and marriage counseling, don't use First Peter
Thank you.
to
Say it
counsel
again for the
people.
people in the
Uh,
back.
don't use First Peter to counsel people about marital relations in the 21st century, because First Peter wasn't written about marriage. It was written about the community of a marginalized community that has no power, no
Mm-hmm.
resources,
Mm-hmm.
and very little survival options. It tells them what to do to survive. Now, the good news, or the radical voice of what it really means to be believers, comes out in 3:8. So on the other side of these submission codes, it's like First Peter, the writer turns to everybody and says, now,
Mm.
when you all come together as Christianos, as believers, not when you're out trying to navigate the social world, but when you
Okay.
all come together as your own community, have mutuality and love for each
Yeah.
other.
Oh,
Bless
wow.
each other. Don't. And
Mm,
so he sets out a completely different way of
my
relating to each
God.
other that happens in house, in the community, recognizing that they can't do that outside of the house because
Mm,
they are fundamentally in danger of death,
mm,
Mm-hmm.
mm,
right?
mm, mm,
Um,
mm, mm.
so I'm on. Did I go too far? Bring me
Now
back.
keep
No,
Bring
going.
me
you
at.
Keep
Bring
didn't.
me back
going,
Listen,
in.
girl.
no,
The
that is
people,
so
Mhm.
good
they in. We in.
because I mean, and you know this, I'm sure, how many women have
Have been
been
told.
counseled that
Right.
you can change your husband just by your
Right.
life, right? You don't
Exactly.
leave him, you stay there. Oh my
Yeah.
Women in
God.
abuse.
That's foolishness. So because that's
Yes.
not what First Peter is talking about. First Peter is talking to an entire Christian community
Yes,
that
right.
none of them are property owners. They are not the governors. They are not the enslavers. They don't have resources, and they're all in danger of
Mm-hmm.
policing, of extermination.
Yes.
And First
Yes.
Peter is written. First Peter is written. So let me do a history piece. First
Come on.
Peter is written right when we get at the time that we begin to see the rise of martyrologies in early
Yes.
Christianity. So
Yes.
we
Mm-hmm.
begin to see stories about Christians saying, "I will proclaim Christ to death," right? Like, and
Yes.
so they're First Peter says Jesus already suffered and died for you. You
Okay.
don't die. You don't. So First Peter does
Wow.
not exercise that option. First Peter does not want the believing community to be so radical in this space that the entire community is killed. It is a strategy of survival.
Mm,
That is it. It is not a book for how to be in relationship and
my
marriage with
God.
people,
My
right?
God.
It's not even underwriting. It's not even underwriting a social order of enslaved and those who are enslaved and those who are enslavers. It's simply saying this is the way it is right now. Do
Mm-hmm.
what you need to do to
Mm-hmm.
not disrupt it. And then in 3:8 is when it turns to this is really the way the thing should be. We should
Okay.
be equal with each other. We
Mm,
should share
mm.
mutuality and power and voice and blessing. We should take care of each other. We should welcome each other, welcome the stranger as if
Mm-hmm.
you're,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so the vision of what we really should be about doesn't happen in the household codes.
Wow.
Okay, I'm going to
Oh my
pause there
God.
because, I can keep going.
Uh,
But
uh, uh, uh.
And
Wow.
as Dr. Melba just said, y'all need to get her book because you can't capture it all in this 1 hour conversation. So please,
Right.
right,
guys,
But I
please get
wanted to
back.
give them, yeah, I wanted to give them just a little taste, right? To know
right.
that there is so much more in these texts than what
There's
we
Yeah.
so
have
much more.
heard and these traditional interpretations.
That's
And
right.
so to be responsible exegetes, right?
That's
To be
right.
responsible biblical
Yeah.
teachers and preachers, we have to be equipped.
Yeah, we have to be equipped. I mean, I want to keep pushing these traditional interpretations. Well,
Yeah.
I was always taught traditional interpretations represent centers of power. You have the power to set the standard or the criteria of what counts as valid interpretation of the biblical text and what doesn't. Particularly if we're talking this is the gathering and the womanist church. I mean, we are women of color. You're starting in the wrong place because that's not even our place, right?
Mm,
Right. So there's a real way in which inheriting these traditional readings, we should actually be like, so I'm suspicious of this because this comes from power, right? That's been able to
okay.
say that we should read it this way, which means
Mm,
there's a whole lot of people who are left without power. And how would
yes.
they read it? How does this
Mm,
apply to us? How does it apply to those situations? So yeah, I want to keep pushing that to say, don't just because you heard it that way and it's been used that way or interpreted meaning has been made of it that way doesn't
hmm.
mean that meaning needs to continue to be made that way.
Yes.
um,
Yes.
we have a
Mm-hmm.
responsibility to disrupt some of those trends,
And I
right?
want to thank our Digi Deacon Carmen White, Janek, who posted a link to the book in the chat. So
All right.
thank you so
Thank
Yep.
much for
you.
that. Yeah. Oh my
If you
goodness.
want, let me just say, if you want a sort of teaser or a smaller sort of a sampling of that, I actually this summer wrote the summer writing series for Working Preacher. And so Working Preacher Summer Series is on First Peter. And so I wrote that.
Oh,
So if you wanted
okay.
something that a little bit smaller, you're like
Okay.
written for that, that gives you a little bit more of a sampling of what we're talking about here in terms of reading First Peter in a different way.
And
Great,
I want
great.
y'all to know, it's not too many times they have asked a Black person to write on working
That's right.
preaching,
That's right.
particularly a Black
That's
woman.
right. Exactly.
So, and I know people use the resource; it's a great resource, but I recognize this. You get top
Recognize.
scholarship when the guy Shively Smith name on it. Okay.
We are all doing our work out here. We all
This
try to
is
do
some
our
good
work.
work you getting over here.
My
And make
goodness.
sure you cite a sister. That's all I'm saying. Just
That's
make sure
right.
you
That's
cite.
right.
Can you cite a sister on this type of work? Oh, but I'm thinking because this is so good, and it's the what we're talking about out here, and I'm thinking about how the traditional you talked about the lazy interpretations, and this is what we're getting in churches. So how was like your first book, and when you go into churches, because Dr. Shively be all over these streets. Do people push? Do you get pushback from women and in churches when you're basically trying to set the people free? Really?
Yeah,
How is that received?
I get all kinds of responses. So I always like to start with the positive. So on one level, my good, when I know I've done my good work, is when I get particularly a young sister or someone who comes up and says, I've never heard it that way, or I've never seen someone say it that way. You have, all the degrees and whatever. I mean, so there's that, right? I mean, so it's not hard. It's not easy to get all of these degrees and biblical studies and whatever.
Man.
And you think about those stories of struggle, the stories of other sisters who have been in academic programs, not just in religion, but in others who just didn't make it. I mean, all the way to issues of suicide, like the stress is so much, and sometimes you go, gosh, why did I do this? Those are the moments that ground me in my why. My why is to be a model and an example, and to say, so all biblical scholars aren't old white men or what, like, and we can stand flat-footed and say that this is what the text says, and this is what thus saith the Lord. So like you said, writing on Working Preacher and some of these other spaces that are unaccustomed to people in our bodies, I do it for those moments. Or a random email from a stranger who I will never probably meet in real time, who says, I saw you when you talked this, or when you did that, or when you preached that, or I read when you wrote this. And I've never heard that. Though that's one of the responses. A funny response that I get, which I love these I love. It's nothing like being in these, especially some of our Black church spaces, or so, and one of them old mothers, one of the old, come up and say, honey, I've been thinking that all these years. I go, yes, ma'am. And so and they'll tell me to repeat it. Now, slow down to repeat what you said. Did I hear you right when you said, yes, ma'am, you heard me, yes, ma'am. So let's, and I slow it down. We repeat it, because mother said she'd been thinking about that all her life. And she needed and now that I stand there and say it, it's yes. I knew it. I've been knowing that, right? Or they give me a lesson, right? So you're right about that. Now, have you thought about, and then it becomes, the teacher becomes the student, and that I learned something from them, right? And that, so those are my fun moments. I have the disruptive moments. So I've presented in spaces where male colleagues, I mean, the game, they're threatened, comes out, because then there's a sparring match that seem to want to take place, right? So there's this sort of it's almost like you're wanting me to show you my paper. So I call it showing my paper, right? Like you now have to prove to you that I know what I want, and I know what that is, right? So you're disrupting the space, or I'm saying this. So I've had those experiences, and I've had people, I can imagine some people might say, what do you do in those instances? Uh, it just depends on how I feel. Right. So sometimes I'm like, let's get it. Well, I
Let's
can go
go.
with you. Right. I know 8 languages. I've translated the Bible in all of them. Like what? Right. And so I can,
Wow.
and some days,
Wow.
some moments, I'm like, I, there's nothing in this for me. So I
Mm-hmm.
don't participate in that. Now I've had moments when women have been who said, you know, I still believe that a woman's supposed to submit to her husband. Da, 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 da. What do you do with that? I let them have that
Let them
because I
have it.
mean, at the
That's
end of the
right.
day, if they're not if they're not in that space
Mm-hmm.
to think about their God given creativity
Mm-hmm.
that God has in each of us, and then in any kind of relationship. So the human relationship is supposed to be one that is dynamic, that creates and recreates us, right?
Yeah.
And if that's not something that they're open to, then it's not for me to deal with that. So yeah, I've had the full range and continue to have
Mm,
the full range.
yeah.
Wow. Now, Dr. Melva Sampson posted in the comments to talk about mysticism in the Bible. And I want to tie that to your
The
work
how.
on Howard Thurman, right? You
Right.
teach a class called Howard Thurman as interpreter, and
Yeah,
Howard Thurman was a mystic, right?
that's right.
Um,
Right.
and so, can you tie those two together? Tell us first, um, uh, for those who may not know, who is Howard Thurman? Because everybody on here
Mm,
may not know. And what
that's
are
right.
some of the things that you do in that class, and how is it received? And
Yeah.
you can just say anything about mysticism there if that you want to.
Yeah. So Howard Thurman is considered in some circles, he's considered kind of like the pastor or sage of the civil rights movement. He was a pioneer in his own right. So in that he was a dean at Howard University, um, 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 up until from the 1930s up until 1944. Then he went out and launched out in San Francisco in 1944 to co to co-found the first multicultural interreligious faith community in this
Mm-hmm.
country in
Mm-hmm.
1944. And from there, he ends up becoming a dean becoming a dean of Marsh Chapel at Boston University, becomes the first African American to become a dean at a historically white university institution in the country in 1955, 53. So I mean, so he's a real trailblazer in
Mm-hmm.
that period. He ends up becoming a sort of mentor to people such as Otis Moss Sr., um, Martin Luther King. I mean, so
Mm-hmm.
he's sort of that
Mm-hmm.
spiritual advisor and voice for them. And yes, he's a mystic. So what's a mystic? A mystic is someone who is concerned, who lives their life. I will always talk about it as in the journey of the spirit,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
someone who front loads spirit as the vehicle
Mm-hmm.
for the living experiment, right? And Thurman saw life with spirit as an ongoing experiment. It is an ongoing testing of spirit of God. It's an ongoing looking for spirit and for God, but it's also an ongoing look at ourselves and
Mm-hmm.
each other. So he was not a mystic who saw the living way as something where we detach from
Right.
other human beings and from society. He saw that the spiritual life roots us even
Mm-hmm.
more in the present moment, roots us even more, connects us even more to people, connects us even more to the situations that block life. Last
Mm,
thing I'll say something about him is he led the first African American delegation to India to
Yeah.
meet Mahatma Gandhi
Mm-hmm.
in the 1930s. So here you have 1935, 1936, Howard Thurman and his wife leading the delegation to meet with Mahatma Gandhi, which I think is very important. Um, so I lost my question in explaining who Howard Thurman was. So what else do you want me to talk about with Howard Thurman?
Your class and how mysticism shows up in the Bible is what Dr. Melville was asking about.
Yeah, so when I talk about Thurman, I really talk about Thurman as interpreter. So let me stay sort of in my lane. When I talk about Thurman, I see Thurman was an interpreter of the biblical text. He literally wrote the commentary essays on Habakkuk in the first interpreter's commentary, so not the new interpreters,
Wow.
the interpreter's commentary, the first version in the early 20th century. So Thurman was an interpreter who was wrestling with text in conversation with context, in conversation with America in its moment of what? Biases, prejudice, silos, Jim Crow, all of this. And Thurman is sitting up there saying the people should come together across cultures and talk about God together.
Right.
Talk about their own cultures and their stories together. He created radical space for that. And so my class looks at the different texts that Thurman is interpreting, but more importantly, how Thurman interprets. Thurman is a mystic who uses images. Thurman writes meditations, meditations of the heart, deepest the hunger. These are meditations, contemplations, prayers, poems, all of this. And everything that Thurman writes is written for you to see something, for you to imagine what it means. One of my favorite, just to give an example, from Meditations of the Heart, one of my favorite meditations from him there is channel, is canal, reservoir, or swamp. Which are you? And he uses these different water bodies.
I love that one.
Yeah, he uses different water bodies to get you to think about yourself. In some of his writings, he'll say to have a session with yourself. So mysticism for Thurman is the invitation to have a session with yourself as you're interpreting text and figure out, do you live your life like a water channel? Do you live your life like a water reservoir? Or do you live your life like a swamp? Right. And so I work with Thurman in that way. Thurman is teaching us how to see, how to interpret with our eyes and with our other sight. Right. What do you see is what he asked over and over again. So I think that's important. Let me say, if you're interested in this work, I have an e-digital project called Images of Interpretation, which talks about this alternative way of interpreting the biblical text, the world, and ourselves with images guided by Howard Thurman. So if you're interested in what I'm talking about here, check out imagesofinterpretation.com, all in one link. Or you can go to my website, and I have a link to it that gives you more information about it.
Thank you so much. Imagesofinterpretation.com. I know somebody's going to put that in the chat. Thank you so much.
I got you.
Oh, okay.
I think I got it that time. Whoa. Well, Dr. Shively,
I love it.
You give
I can keep going.
I know.
Man. And we can keep listening.
Be here. But I want to make sure we have time to talk about, because you talked about some of your work, but what you have, what are you working on? What can we look forward? I mean, you talked a little bit about one of your books, but what's coming out from Dr. Shively that we can work with?
Oh yeah, quite a bit. So I next year my next book is on Second Peter. So like I said, it's called The Rhetoric of Second Peter and African American Women. And that's really looking at how to what end is Second Peter persuasive? Another way to talk about it is what kind of people do and act like Second Peter acts. And we're learning about that, and through how Black women handled Second Peter or did not handle Second Peter, right? So we're taking our interpreters' notes and cues from 19th century Black women about what the ways in which Second Peter is useful or a problem for us, right? And what are some of the alternative options? I have a book coming out on Thurman that talks about Thurman as interpreter. And there's a few essays that are actually coming out in independent volumes around that. And then I have a volume with Fortress Press coming out on Black women's interpreters notes on crucifixion, which is sort of
Mm,
another project that I've done, that I do work with. It's building off of the Ida B. Wells work, right? So what it means to reinterpret crucifixion through Black women's voices,
wow.
language, experiences, and voices.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Mm, mm, mm.
So that's some of what I'm up to.
Wow.
The fun part is I've been able to work with just a sidebar for those who are interested. I've been able to work with a lot of these different Bible projects that are out here. For those who don't know, there's a new Revised Standard Version
Yeah.
update that's out
Okay.
there
Yeah.
that's really set the stage for a new set of offerings in terms of study Bibles. So the HarperCollins Study Bible, Westminster John Knox Study Bible, the Oxford Annotated Study Bible, just to give you all a heads up. So these critical study Bibles are all in the process of doing new editions, right? And because of this translation. So I've either been an associate editor of the New Testament, in this case with the HarperCollins, or I've been a
Mm.
contributor playing in the back of the house. So, First
Well,
Peter,
that's all
Second
the more reason why
Mhm.
we need to. If you don't have the HarperCollins Study Bible, you need to get it. The
Yeah. Well,
updated
not right
After
version.
the
now. It
one
ain't
that
out
she
yet. The
got,
new one's not out yet, but it will
Yeah.
be.
after she get the one
After
she
she.
worked on.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
When I
So
tell
that's kind
y'all, we bring some of the best people you ever could get here at the
of,
gathering. We are just
Auntie.
fortunate
Well, now
to.
doesn't she have to tell us something about she's doing this summer?
Yeah, I was just gonna say because
Oh,
you
okay.
got one. You got one more thing this summer, right?
well, right. So I am, what is it? The featured. Oh, you're talking about this. So one more thing I want to talk
She
about
got so
there.
much
Look, I got a
going
couple of
on.
things happening. I'm thinking you're talking about this other thing I'm doing in August. Uh, but it is
She's a
important.
Bible
So
boss, exactly.
right,
Period.
I'm so thankful that I've been able to receive a grant from the Wabash Center for Teaching and Learning. And so one of the pieces that I'm doing with the grant for July and the 1st of August is offering a 6-week writing group, small writing group for particularly doctoral students or newly minted PhDs in religion and theological education. But I open it up. So, history, cultural studies, I'm true to myself and saying that
Mm-hmm.
where I'm located is in religion and theological studies. So it's going to be a 6-week writing commitment in which we're going to gather on Tuesday, starting next Tuesday, July 5th, virtually from 7 to 9 to write. So if you are working on a proposal, a dissertation, you're revising an article, a grant article, you're studying for your comps and writing up your mock essays, and you are finding it hard to get a jump start, or you need a little bit of community and structure, then register to join us for our writing, what I call writing sprint. So I used to be a swimmer. And so I always talk about
Mm.
writing as taking a lap in the pool. So we're going to do 2-hour laps in the pool of writing every Tuesday for 6 weeks, starting July
Wow.
5th.
Wow. And we will post this flyer on our website as well as
Right.
in the chat
The link.
on Facebook. Yeah.
All
Yeah,
right,
and
thank
the
you.
link so you can
And the link.
register.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
It's
if you
gonna
want,
be it's gonna be very beneficial for anybody who signed up. I'm already letting
yeah,
folks know. Get in there with
right.
Dr. Shively because
Yeah, and we're
it's
going
gonna
to
help
write.
somebody.
So,
Yeah.
right, look, we're going to write. So I'll give a couple of tips, and we'll share some tips, and then we're going to hold each other accountable, and we're going to get some work done in different ways for a couple of hours each Tuesday. So at least we know for 6 weeks, every day, every Tuesday, we're doing a little bit of something.
That's great.
Yeah,
And that's how you accomplish it, just a little bit at a time.
that is.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
That really is.
one stroke at a time. To stay
That's
with my
right.
swimmer
Swimming
metaphor, one
analogy.
stroke
Yeah.
at a time. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, Camila, I
So
think it's on you.
yeah, can you bring us back in?
Oh, oh, listen, I get so caught up.
I know.
That's
Oh
good to get
well, we
caught up.
coming to
It's
the
good to
end,
get
and
caught up.
everybody know what the last question gonna be. Because
Uh
Dr.
oh.
Shively, you doing everything and everything and everything, and you're doing it well though. You're doing
Yes.
everything well in high quality,
Okay,
and
give or
you're a mama,
take.
and you're a
Right.
mama, and you do all the other things.
That's
So
right.
we need to know, how do you take care of yourself?
Is that not the question, right?
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That's the
I'm
question.
better. I am better some days than others. Um, one of the ways in which I take care of myself is I Though small, I do have a strong sisterhood around me that
Mm-hmm.
keeps me accountable. So when I am not taking care of myself or checking on myself, I have some sisters who are truth tellers to me, who know
Mm-hmm.
how to speak my language, so to speak, and
Mhm.
to that help check on me and get on me. And sometimes they just take me away, right? So they say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, you need to stop. We're getting ready to
Mm-hmm.
go and get get a massage or go somewhere and do some. So that's one way I take care of myself. I keep people around me who tell me the truth, who see
Mm-hmm.
me and
Yeah.
can tell me the truth
Who
when I
see
am
you?
not, who see me and can tell me the truth when I'm not. The second thing I do is actually I love walking. So I love
Mhm.
walking and I love walking trails. And so I do a lot of walking and thinking, and park life is life for me, and spend a lot of time in parks, just being. Thurman used to sit by trees. He used to talk to
Wow.
trees. I don't know if I'm talking to trees, but I am sitting near them, or at least walking by them. So that's something that I do. Walk by a lot of trees. That's what I do.
That's
The
good.
last thing I would say is I love music and I love movies. And so I enjoy
Mm.
music and movies in community with family and with friends.
That's good.
Mhm.
Woo, well,
Wow.
you have blessed the people on tonight. We are so
Thank you.
glad that you said yes and you joined
Thank
us
you
for
for
Yeah.
this
having me.
conversation. We're so glad everybody joined in because I'm telling you, the people, if you get a chance, just go back and look at the comments because the people are they all in,
All
around here.
right.
And we're just so grateful, babe. We're going to give you a chance if you want to say anything before we
Well,
sign
well
off. Well, go ahead.
Verzola posted here, and she said that that you had one more thing to say that that you're
We're going to
doing
do.
that we missed.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to, because I forgot about the writing thing. I was
Okay.
like, oh yeah, we got that coming out tomorrow, don't we? So yes, I'm also the one of the I'm the featured preacher teacher of the week for the Chautauqua Lakeside events in August. So I think it's the second or third week in August. I will be at Chautauqua as the featured preacher and then teacher for the week there for their preacher
Wow.
series during the summer. So that's what was in the front of my mind.
That's
Wow.
amazing.
Well, you are a jewel. You
Thank
just,
you for
I
having
mean, you
my
set
sisters.
this last Womanist Wednesday on fire. I think
Oh,
you
this is the
helped.
last one.
Yeah,
Last
I
one for
think
the season. Yeah,
last one
Oh
we
for the
my
ended on
gosh.
season.
we ended strong.
Yeah.
Look, I'm glad you didn't tell me that ahead of time. That would have put a whole other layer of pressure.
No, it was
You
so good.
closed us out, ma'am. You closed us out.
And you
well,
did it
well,
well. And I know the
thank
people
you.
are blessed and going to purchase your book, but I think you help
Please.
expand the minds and help people to
Yeah.
understand that there's more. There's more
There is
than what we've
more.
been taught. There's more than what we currently think is
Yeah.
truth and real,
Truth.
right?
Right.
Um,
Right. And
and,
the
and
biblical text does more than simply
yeah,
tell us what we should do. It might also lift up a mirror and tell you what you have no business doing, right? That you
uh,
don't want to be that. And you
Mm-hmm.
don't want to act like that. And you don't want to
yeah,
treat people that way. And so we got to keep ourselves open. That's my word.
yeah,
Keep yourself open to
absolutely.
interpretation being open.
And I think it's important for this community and others to hear this
Yeah.
level of brilliance and scholarship coming out of the mouth of a beautiful,
Uh,
bodacious, badass Black woman.
And
all
I
So,
mean
right.
all of
Thank
that.
you.
all of it.
Thank you. I
Yes,
receive all of that. I receive all of that. Look forward
Yes.
to engaging all of you in different ways.
all right.
Well, we
Thank you
are
so
so
much.
grateful. And thank you, everybody. We want to let everybody know you
Thank
can
you.
join us on Saturday, not just on Wednesdays, in case you've never joined the gathering. We will have a special in person service this week at 6 o'clock Central Standard Time. If you are not in the DFW, just come right on back to this gathering Facebook page or YouTube channel and check us out. We would love to have you with our worship.
All right.
All right. Amen. All right.
Amen.
Thank y'all. Peace. See you next
Peace,
time. Dr.
blessing,
Shively, don't leave.
blessing.